A while back, I was at my local hobby store and I found this bag of a whole bunch of miniatures in the bargain bin in the back. And there's some really great finds in here. It's a lot of military stuff, which I may use more in the future. But inside there were also these two little astronauts. I've been wanting to make a diorama with them. I just wasn't sure what it was going to be yet. So today we are finally going to put these little guys to use and make a cool diorama. Along with the little astronauts, I also picked up this moon rock monster. Now it's actually a Pathfinder Earth Elemental mini, but I think with the right paint job, I can make it into a moon elemental. I'll be using this wood circle as the base, and the moon elemental will be placed on it something like this, and the two astronauts will be placed in front of it. And that's where the name for this diorama comes from. It's right behind me, isn't it? The elemental and the astronauts get set on a few painting sticks just to make it easier to paint and deal with, and then they get sent outside for a coat of white primer. The previous owners of these astronauts had already painted, or at least started to paint them, so with the white spray paint I'll sort of be starting over from scratch. The primer did make the seam lines on the elemental a bit more obvious, so I'm going to use some plastic putty to fill those real quick. I'm going to start by painting the visors, and I'll be using a mix of this tainted gold and black. I'm using gold because the real Apollo spacesuits had a gold visor that they used to protect themselves against UV light. This was especially important on the moon because it doesn't have an atmosphere like Earth to filter out UV radiation. I'm keeping the paint job on these guys simple because 1, they're small, and 2, they're really not that detailed to begin with. I just add some color to the valves, and if I'm not mistaken, these are the oxygen in and oxygen out valves. Now, I don't know for sure, but I think these are from an older model kit, probably early 2000s. Either way, I add a few small details, and then I use a diluted gray wash to add some highlights and shadows. Washes like this are a great way to bring out small details, as well as potentially cover up any small mistakes you may have made in the paint job. You can see here the one on the right has had the gray wash and the one on the left has not yet. Moving on to the moon elemental, this guy also gets a pretty easy paint job. Although the moon's surface is quite beautiful in its own way, in terms of color it is a bit gray, to say the least, so my moon elemental is also going to be gray, but like a multi-layered classy gray. And to get that multi-layered classy gray effect, I'm using a few different grays and gray washes and gray dry brushing. Besides the gray wash, all of the other gray colors I've been using have come from the same base gray color. I just add white to it to lighten it for this final coat. Now he still doesn't quite look alive enough, so I'm going to try to give him some glowing eyes using my airbrush and some fluorescent yellow paint. I spray a small amount around the eye and then add a tiny point of white using some paint at the center of the eye. I'll then add another layer of that yellow to cover up the white dots. For the surface of my moon diorama, I'll be using some foam core board with the paper removed from both sides. Now, when it comes to foam core, if you know you'll be taking the paper off, the cheaper it is, the better, because the cheap stuff is actually super easy to pull the paper off of. I then use some foam safe super glue. It's very important that it's foam safe because if it's not, it will eat through the foam. So make sure you're using foam safe super glue. Once that's dried, I can cut off the excess and then I can use a sanding stick to clean up the edges. Since the original elemental is still drying, I'll use its twin to mark out where I want it to sit. I press into place to make an indent that will hopefully make it easier to blend the mini into the moon's surface. I press it in at a slight angle because I want the elemental to be looking up slightly so that you can actually see the eyes. Then, using my torch in a well-ventilated area, I add a bit more surface texture to the moon's surface. Then, to add even more texture and also to seal everything in place, I'm making a mix of modeling paste, watered down Mod Podge, and a bit of plaster of Paris, plus some actual dirt from outside. And I mix it into this rocky paste and I will stipple it over the entire moon's surface. And just for good measure, I sprinkle on a few more rocks just to add a bit more variation. I'll let that fully dry overnight, and while it dries, I can start working on a few larger moon rocks. Now, I don't quite have the budget for real moon rocks, so I'll have to settle for some plain old earth rocks. Now, I can, however, make them look like moon rocks. I gave them a coat of white primer and then repeat the same process with these rocks as I did with the elemental. I'll be using these rocks mostly to help blend the elemental into the rest of the surface and to make it look like it's actually popping out of the surface. Speaking of the surface, it's dry now and I can start to add the final coats of color. I mix up a batch of baking soda, gray paint, and Mod Podge to make this dusty, sandy texture that I'll stipple over the entire surface. I ended up adding about 2 coats of this paint mix. Then, once those 2 layers are dry, it gets the same treatment as the elemental and the rocks. And while we are finishing up the paint job here, I think it's a great time to give a shout out to all my patrons over on my Patreon. Thank you all so much for the support, I really do appreciate it. If you're enjoying this video, please do consider dropping a like, consider subscribing, commenting, sharing, all of that fun stuff. I've got a whole bunch of other videos on my channels, dioramas, making robots out of trash, all sorts of stuff, so check it out. To make sure that my moon elemental is actually looking up slightly so you can see those glowing eyes, I'm adding this small piece of a coffee stir stick as sort of a spacer to force the miniature to angle up. I'll glue that in place, and then I will also glue the miniature in place on top of it. Adding this angle does add a slight gap, as you can see, but that's where those moon rocks come into place. I'm just doing a dry fit here, and eventually I will glue all these rocks in place with some more foam safe super glue. I add a few small pins to the bottom of the astronaut's feet, and then I can attach them to the diorama, and with that, this project is pretty much done. Hey, thanks for sticking around till the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed that one. It was a fun time this week to sort of take a step back and make a small diorama. I haven't made a diorama in quite a long time, so this was a fun little break from all my robots. Don't worry if you're a fan of the robots, another trash bot is coming off the assembly line next week, and you'll be able to see that on Saturday. That's all for me. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, put it down in the comment section and I will try to get back to you. I do read every single comment and I try to respond if I can. Thank you all for watching, and as always, I will see you in the next video.